Hello again. It was so great to see so many of you on the Zoom call this morning. I am going to keep reading People's Works. We are on chapter 22. It's called Discoveries. When Lena awoke the next morning, she thought there was something wrong with her eyes. Everything had gone gray. She sat up and looked around. No, it wasn't her eyes. It was the air that was wrong. It was so thick she could hardly see through it. The truck was merely a dark shadow. The buildings of the... From somewhere in the murk, she heard Casper's voice. He was muttering to himself as he had been the night before, but she could hear only a low, growly sound, no words. A dark shape appeared and moved toward her. It was Maddie. She bent over and whispered, "Don't get up yet. Lie back down." "What's wrong with the air?" Lena asked her. "It's called fog," Maddie said. "It comes in off the water. Now lie down. Curl up." Lena lay down and pulled the blanket up under her chin. Maddie knelt beside her and whispered, "Pretend you're sick. Moan and groan a little. Refuse to get up. I'll explain later." Lena followed instructions. She stared up into the swirly grayness and whimpered a little. It wasn't hard to pretend she didn't feel good. She rarely felt so cold and miserable in her whole life. She saw Maddie and Casper huddling together, two shadowy lumps in a log. They were talking and their voices rose, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. She must have gone to sleep again. When she opened her eyes, the fog was thinner. A pale sun, like a circle of paper, shone through it. Without sitting up, she looked around for Maddie and saw her sitting on the back of the truck eating. She didn't see Casper anywhere. "Maddie," she whispered. Maddie jumped down and came over to her. "You can get up," she said. "He's gone." Lena sat up. "Gone?" Maddie nodded. "Into the ruins. He wouldn't give up this notion of finding treasure. Something in his mind has slipped, I think. He wasn't all that steady to begin with, and now he's lost his balance." She took Lena's hand and pulled her to her feet, and together they folded the blanket. "He wants you to help him with his search. Go into the small spaces where he can't go. I told him you'd help tomorrow, but today you weren't well, so he went off to look around by himself. Preliminary exploration, he called it." "I don't want to help him," Lena said. "You aren't going to," said Maddie. "We're leaving." "We are? When? How?" Lena asked. "Now," said Maddie. "Come and help me." Maddie climbed up into the truck, unstrapped the two bicycles, and handed them down to Lena. She opened the food chest and took out some of the remaining traveler cakes, along with two water bottles, and she wrapped those in blankets and tied them with the rope. "Here," she said to Lena, "this pack is yours, and this bike." "You mean we're going to ride all the way back to Sparks?" Lena thought with horror of the vast empty distance and the blazing heat. "We won't have to ride all the way," Maddie said. "There are a lot of roamers. Someone will help us." "And we just leave Casper here by himself?" Lena wasn't sure that even someone as unlikable as Casper should be abandoned in this terrible place. "He'll be fine," said Maddie. "He has his truck and all of his supplies. He doesn't need us." So they tied the packs onto their backs. They walked the bikes across the rubbly part of the road until they came to the place where it opened out onto the long downhill curve. Just then the fog lifted and the air came clear. Lena turned around to take a last look at the city she had such high hope for, the city she thought might be a home for the people of Ember. In the sunlight, it looked more sad than terrible. Over the rolling, grass-covered mounds, the skeletons of the old towers stood like watchmen. The trees bent their backs before the wind, and the wind swept ripples across the surface of the green water that wrapped around the city edges. Maybe, thought Lena, the sparkling city she had seen in her mind was a vision from the distant future, not the distant past. Maybe someday the people of Ember, or the great great grandchildren of today's people of Ember, would come back here and build the city again. "All right," said Maddie. "Let's ride." Lena flung her leg over the bike and settled herself on the seat. This was a bigger bike than the one she was used to. She gripped the handlebars, gave a push with her foot, and then she was off. From the start, the bike moved so fast she hardly had to pedal. She zoomed forward, going far faster than ever she had fastest running. The wind in her face swept her hair out behind her, shot through her clothes, nearly peeled back her eyelids. The bumps in the road made the handlebars buck like something alive. She held on with a steel grip. It was absolutely terrifying and absolutely joyful. Down the long hill they went, she and Maddie alone in the wild, Empty highway, no need to pedal at all, only steer around broken places or bits of debris. The fast air came into Lena's mouth and buffeted down into her lungs, and she laughed out loud. It was such a glorious freedom. When the slope leveled out a little, she steered the bike in big curves, back and forth, and Maddie did too. They whooped and laughed and raced each other, and alongside them the white birds swooped too, screeching in their shrill voices. Then came a long stretch of flat road and hard pedaling. With many stops for resting and eating and drinking water, they rode all day. Lena's seat was sore and her legs grew tired. Blisters rose on her hands from holding so tight to the handlebars, but Maddie said, "Just a little farther, and then we'll stop." And Lena kept going, finding strength when she thought it was gone, until at last, at the end of the day, they came to the place where the water ended and they could begin to turn eastward toward the hills. Here is where they stopped for the night. They found a creek with a trickle of clear water running along the bottom. Maddie said the round green leaves that grew on the creek's banks were good to eat, so they had those with the traveler cakes, along with some wild onions and a few blackberries they found deep in a thicket of bramble. There was no cold wind here, as there had been in the city. The evening was warm and still, except for the chirping of frogs in the creek. They spread their blankets on the ground. Some were in the dark, and owl hooted softly, and another answered. Maddie was lying on her back with her hands clasped over her wide stomach. To Lena, gazing at her profile against the sky, she looked like a small range of hills, solid and comforting. So Lena dared to ask a question that had been troubling her. "Maddie," she said, "could there ever be another disaster like the one that came before? Or even worse? What if every single person and every single animal was killed?" "Don't worry," said Maddie. "People didn't make life, so they can't destroy it. Even if we were to wipe out every bit of life in the world, we can't touch the place life comes from. Whatever made plants and animals and people spring up in the first place will always be there, and life will spring up again." Maddie turned over and tugged her blanket around her neck. "Time to sleep now," she said. "More hard riding tomorrow." In the morning they were on their way as soon as the sun rose. Lena groaned as she got on her bike again. Her muscles were sore from yesterday, but she soon warmed up, and for a long time the road was flat and the riding was easy. After an hour or so, Lena spotted something moving up ahead of them, a dot in the distance. "Look," she called to Maddie, who was a little way behind her. "I think it's a truck. Maybe it's a roamer." In 10 minutes or so they had caught up to it. The man driving the truck turned when he heard them calling. Surprise lit up his face, and he halted his oxen and jumped down. "Greetings! Glad to see some travelers. Haven't met anyone on the road for 4 days." He was a short, stocky man with a wild fuzz of black hair that stood out several inches all around his head. Pelton Moss was his name, and he was indeed a roamer, as was easy to see from the crates and barrels on his truck. All his containers were nearly empty, though. He had sold his most recent load of goods to a remote South Bay settlement. Now he was heading back in the direction of Sparks. "I'll take you with me," he said, "if you'll help me collect along the way." And so for 5 days Lena got to be a roamer. At every ancient abandoned town they stopped and combed through the derelict houses. Not much was left. These houses had been picked nearly clean in the last 200 years, but sometimes, if they looked carefully, they found things the previous roamers had overlooked, or maybe they just thought it was worthless. Lena loved these searches. In some ways, it was like being a messenger back in Ember. She could go everywhere, look in every forgotten corner, and if she was lucky, make discoveries. And she was lucky. She found a silver locket with a picture of someone inside, though the picture was so old and stained she couldn't tell if it was a woman or a baby. She found a small round pane of glass with a handle. The glass made whatever you looked at it appear bigger. "A magnifying glass," said Pelton. "Nice." She found a tiny red truck with wheels that still turned. She found a strip of leather with a buckle and 2 round metal pieces attached to it. It was too short to be a belt. There were words on the metal circles, but they were so worn she couldn't read them. "That's a dog collar," Pelton told her. "Not very useful, but interesting." At a house that stood by itself far out on a field, she opened a cabinet on a back porch, where the screen was hanging in brown flaps, and the cabinet was a box that said "Monopoly" in faded letter on its lid. Inside were tiny dotted cubes and a tiny bit of wood shaped like houses. Wonderful, Pelton exclaimed. Extremely rare. There was another box in the cabinet with a picture of a garden on top and a heap of oddly shaped pieces of cardboard inside. And at the back of the cabinet, in a clutter of broken dolls, torn pages from books, and little jars of dried up paint, Lena found a bar of metal about 3 inches long that Pelton said was a magnet. Put it up against the truck, he said. It'll stick right on there. Even as she enjoyed the searching, though, Lena couldn't help imagining how it would be for the people of Ember to come out into this empty land and try to start a town. How would they turn the hard, cracked earth into fields for crops? What would they build houses with? What would they eat while they chopped up the soil and put together their shelters? A picture rose in her mind of Ember's 400 people scattered across the brown field like a flock of lost birds, scratching in the dry grass for seeds or bugs, huddling for shade beneath a few trees, trying to build shelters of sticks or straw. She shuddered and made the picture go away. It was best to keep her attention on searching. Maddie didn't do much searching. She didn't care for bending over and creeping underneath things and wedging her large self into small spaces. While Lena and Pelton hunted, she walked around in the fields and the overgrown gardens behind the houses, looking for old fruit trees, wild grapevines, and the kind of leaves, roots, nuts, and mushrooms that were okay to eat. Lena would look out the window of the house she was poking through and see Maddie wading through knee-high grass toward a gnarled old apple tree, or she'd see her wide back and among the bushes as she picked berries. Sometimes Maddie simply sat. Lena would see her settled into an ancient lawn chair, gazing across a field or up a street, not moving at all. What was she thinking about? Lena wondered all those times. She looked so serious. On the evening of the third day, they stopped by a wide, slow part of the river. As the sun went down, they sat on the riverbank, drinking cool tea that Pelton made with mint leaves, and they talked. Pelton told about the places he had seen, and Maddie and Lena told about Casper's quest in the city, his mad study of the old songs about treasure. Oh, yes, said Pelton. I've heard those old rhymes all my life, and my father before me heard them too. It's an old verse or a song. I think come down from years ago and scrambled, probably in the process. Everyone says it in a different way, something like this. He sang in a sweet but off-key voice. There's buried treasure in the ancient city. Remember, remember from times of old. What's hidden will come to light again. It's far more precious than diamonds and gold. Well, that's the way I heard it from an old man who lives up in the mountains near Angle Rock. Then I heard another version from Maggie Pierce over by Fulcher. She sings it like this. Remember the city, remember, where treasure is hidden under the ground. The city, always remember, that's where the treasure will be found. Lena stared at him. Her mouth dropped open, her eyebrows flew upward, and her heart thudded in her chest. He laughed. What are you looking so amazed at? Think you're going to go find this treasure? Nobody believes those old things anymore. They're nursery rhymes, old jingles made up to put babies to sleep. Some still believe it, said Maddie, but it's only those with a bit of madness in them, and a good measure of greed. That's right, said the roamer. I've known a few people like that. One of them was sure it was in the old city of Sanzay and spent his whole life digging through the ruins looking for it. Finally died when a chimney fell on him. Maddie snorted. Such nonsense people believe. Lena was shaking her head. She began to smile. No, no, she said. You have it all wrong. She laughed. She couldn't help it. It's not nonsense. It's true. I'm sure. What she suddenly knew seemed so wonderful and astonishing that she leapt up and clapped her hands, laughing again. You're a silly one, said the roamer. I'm not silly. The city in that rhyme, that's the city I come from. The roamer cast a sideways glance at Maddie. What's the matter with her? Has she got a fever? Maddie reached up for Lena's hand. Calm down now, she said. Tell us what you're thinking about. So Lena explained. Sing the first line again. The first line of the second song, she said. Pelton eyed her strangely. Remember the city, remember, where treasure is hidden under the ground? That first line, said Lena. I'm sure it's meant to be remember the city of Ember. That's the name of my home. It was under the ground. Not sure I believe that, said Pelton. I think it's true, said Maddie. They all say it, all the ones who come from there. And what about the treasure, then? Pelton said. It was us, cried Lena. "We were the treasure, the people of Ember." She felt a swell of love of all of a sudden for her old city. Sing that first song again, the last line of it. Pelton sang, "What's hidden will come to light again. It's far more precious than diamonds and gold." "You see," said Lena, "come to light. We came up into the light, and we were more precious than diamonds and gold because they thought we might be the last people, the only ones left." The three of them gazed at each other in wonder. "I believe she's right," said Maddie at last. "Maybe so," said Pelton. He stared curiously at Lena. "You lived underground?" So then for the rest of the evening, Lena told him about the city of Ember, and how she had been a messenger there, and how she and Dune had found the way out. It was late when they finally lay down for the night. Lena couldn't sleep at first, thinking of the old songs and what they meant. Someone long ago had hoped that at least a few people would survive and had wanted them to remember her city and the treasure it held, the treasure that was most valuable of all, herself, her family, and all the generations of people who had lived in that secret place, their purpose, though they didn't know it, to make sure that human beings did not vanish from the world, no matter what happened above. The third town meeting. After the rampage in the plaza, the three town leaders went up into the tower room for an urgent meeting. They flopped into their chairs and sat without speaking for a few moments, staring down at the mess below. "What do we do now?" said Wilmer. Ben curled both hands into fists and set them on the table in front of them. "The cave people must leave." "Leave?" said Mary. "Leave," said Ben. "They must go away from here." "But they haven't been here for 6 months yet," said Wilmer. "They must go now," said Ben. "It's better for them anyhow to leave before winter really sets in." "They won't want to leave," said Wilmer, tugging anxiously at his hair. "I think they understand now that there's nowhere for them to go." "They must go," said Ben. "We can never feel safe while they are here. If they refuse to go, we will force them to. We have the means to do it." There was a long silence. Ben and Mary glared at each other. Wilmer's eyes darted anxiously between them. At last, Mary set the palms of her hands on the table and took a long breath. "You are speaking of the weapon," she said. "That's right," said Ben. "We have it for situations of dire emergency. I think we have an emergency now." "We've never used it before," said Wilmer. "We don't even know how to work it." "I think it's unwise to use it," said Mary. "We have always tried hard not to repeat mistakes of our ancestors. Using the weapon would be the first step down the path that they took." "We may not actually have to use the weapon," said Ben. "All we have to do is threaten them with it. Just the sight of it will make them do what we say. That is, leave." "What are you proposing," said Mary, "is sending 400 people to their deaths." "Not necessarily," said Ben. "The village of Sparks started with almost nothing. Why shouldn't they?" "It's not true that we started with nothing. The founder of Sparks came here from the old cities and a truck loaded with enough food and supplies to keep them going for months. These people have nothing at all." "We will send a truck with them then," said Ben, "with barrels of food, water, and some basic supplies." "That would maybe last them a week," said Mary. "And they don't have any skills. They haven't had time to learn them." Ben sighed impatiently. "Are we supposed to subject our own people to hardship and danger because of a bunch of refugees from a cave? Isn't it our job to protect our own people?" "But if they rebel against this order," said Wilmer, "then what?" "I thought I made that clear," said Ben. "We use force. It is our only option." He pondered for a moment, frowning into the air above Wilmer's head. "We'll put the weapon on a truck and take it to the hotel. If they put up any resistance, it'll be right there, ready to use." He thumped a fist on the table. "I say we give them 1 day to prepare. The day after tomorrow they will leave Sparks, all of them, for good. Shall we vote on it?" They nodded. "I vote yes," said Ben. "They must leave." "I vote no," said Mary. Wilmer stared down at his hands. He swallowed. He took a shaky breath. I vote yes," he said. So it was decided. They would make the announcement that very night, calling the people of Ember together after they were through with work and before they went back to the hotel. Ben would be the one to tell them. It would make it clear that the decision was final. Chapter 23. Getting Ready for War. The announcement shocked the people of Ember. That evening, they swarmed through the halls of the Pioneer Hotel in an uproar. People wept and shouted and moaned. In the lobby, Dune encountered a group of people embroiled in a huge argument. "It's the fault of that Hassler boy," shouted someone. "He's the one who started this riot. He was egging people on." "No, he stood up for us. He gave them what they deserved," cried someone else. "He's a troublemaker. He's a hero." Dune started up the stairs. Halfway up, he passed Lizzie. Her face was flushed with excitement. She grabbed his arm. "He won't let him kick us out," she said. "Will he?" "Will who?" said Dune. "Tick. I'm sure he'll save us. He's so brave, isn't he? He'll make them change their minds." She hurried on down the stairs. It was many hours before people went to sleep that night. The noise in the hallways went on, as some people wailed that they were all going to die, and others vowed to fight, and others gathered up their belongings and stuffed them into sacks. Sage was so frightened by what was happening that he curled up in the corner with a blanket over his head. But Dune and his father and Edward Pocket sat talking for a long time. "I don't see how we can make a town from nothing out in the empty lands," said Dune. "I don't believe they ever thought we could. We starved trying to do it. We can't go. They can't make us." His father, who sat leaning against the wall with his knees, shook his head sadly. "I don't know," he said. "This weapon they have, they could use that to force us out." "But what could it be?" Dune said. "Just one weapon? I don't understand." "To be effective," said Edward Pocket in his most learned tone, "a weapon must come into contact with the person or persons it is used against. The question is, how can one weapon be effective against 400 people? My guess is that it is something very large that can be made to fall on us and crush us." "But where could they hide it if it's that large? It would have to be as big as a mountain," said Dune. "It could be an animal," said Dune's father. "They might have it in a cage in the basement of the town hall, something fierce that they would let loose on us. Or it would be something like poison oak, only worse," said Dune. "Some sort of poison that they could spray on us." His father nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he said, "that could be it." "But father," said Dune, "we have to fight him, don't you think? No matter what the weapon is, we can't just leave. It's so unfair." Edward Pocket, who had been sitting cross-legged on the floor, scrambled to his feet. He clenched both fists and raised them as if he was ready to pound somebody. "I'm not leaving," he shouted. "Let them try and make me. I'll chain my leg to a big tree or something." From under his blanket, Sage moaned. "Besides," Edward went on, "I have work to do here. They need me. They need all of us." He sat down again. "Probably tomorrow they'll change their minds." "I don't think so," said Dune's father. "That Ben sounded serious to me." "So what do we do then, father?" asked Dune. "We fight, don't we?" Dune's father sighed. He stretched his long legs out in front of him and stared down at his knees. "Think about what it would mean to fight," he said. "Say we barricade ourselves here in the hotel and refuse to leave. They come at us with their weapon, whatever it is. Some of us hurt, some of us die. We go out to meet them with whatever weapon we have, sticks, maybe pieces of broken glass. We battle each other." He ran his head across his head and sighed again. "Maybe they set fire and steal their food, and they come after us and beat us. We beat them back. In the end, maybe we damage them so bad that they're too weak to make us leave. What do we have? Friends and neighbors and families dead, a place half destroyed, and those left in it full of hatred for us, and we ourselves will have to live with the memory of the terrible things we have done." Dune pictured all of this as his father spoke. He hadn't really imagined before what fighting would be like. "But still," he said, at least some of us would survive, and we'd have a place to live. If we go out to the empty lands, we all die." His father just shook his head. "I don't know, Dune. I have to admit, I just don't know what to do." "I know what I'm going to do," said Edward Pocket. "What?" asked Dune. "Go to bed," said Edward. He stamped over to his closet and crawled in. "Wake me up," he said, "when you've got all this figured out." An hour or so later, the noise of marching sounded in the hallway and the thump, thump of knocks on doors, one after the other. Tick's voice rang out. "Calling all fighters!" he shouted. "All fighters! All those who refuse to be banished! Meet me at the head of the road! We must make a plan!" The footsteps passed, and Dune heard the same message repeated farther down the hall, and again farther yet. He put his clothes and his shoes back on. In spite of what his father had said, he still didn't think the people of Ember should agree to go quietly out into the wilderness. Somehow they must resist, and Tick was the only one with a plan. The hall was full of people, a few of them murmuring quietly to each other, most of them silent. All were headed for the stairs. Outside the night was warm, but a restless wind stirred in the trees, and scraps of cloud flew across the stars. With the others, Dune headed for the meeting place. Tick stood in a patch of moonlight, the dense shrubbery behind him, when people had gathered around. He held up his rod and all whispering died away. "Listen carefully," Tick said. He spoke in a level voice, not loudly, but every word was sharp and clear. "The day we've been ordered to leave, the day after tomorrow, we will assemble at dawn at the front of the hotel. Have your weapons with you. There are still many people who haven't made up their minds to fight, and a few who are ready to go meekly into the empty lands, following orders. We want to change their minds. Flash your weapons. Shout our battle cry. We will not go. Remind them of the black words of the hatred sprawled in mud on the plaza and on the walls of our hotel, and the poison leaves on the doorstep. We will make those cowards ashamed of their weakness. We will make them understand that obedience to evil commands is a disgrace. Most of them, maybe all of them, will join us, and once they have, we will march into the village, loud and defiant and strong, and in the plaza we will confront the town leaders and make our demands." A few people raised their fists and shouted approval. "What are our demands?" Dune asked. He was standing at the front of the crowd, just a few feet away from Tick. "They are these," said Tick. "We demand to be made full citizens of this town, not cast out into the wilderness. We demand to be properly fed. We demand decent places to stay. We demand the end to unfair rules and insults." They seemed reasonable things to ask for, Dune thought. "And if they refuse to agree to our demands," he asked, "then of course we fight." "But they have this terrible weapon they talk about. What is it?" said Dune. Others echoed his question. "Yeah, what about it?" Tick smiled. His teeth showed white in the moonlight. "They have one weapon," he said. "We have many, and each weapon in the right hand is an engine of power." His voice grew louder. "We will attack them, like this," he cried. He raised his steel rod and brought it slashing down so that the air whistled around it. The end cut into the ground. He raised it again and whipped it back and forth, striking tree trunks so hard it gashed their bark. He rolled around and battered the bushes behind him. "You cannot defeat us," he cried to an imaginary enemy. "Right is on our side. We will have your blood. We will break your bones." He went to a frenzy of stabbing and slicing, thrashing wildly among the bushes. Leaves were flying, twigs snapped. Something fluttered and fell. Dune saw it. So did Tick. He stopped for a moment and glanced down. At his feet was a half-grown baby bird that must have been huddled deep within the bushes. It flopped onto its side, its beak gaping. "You see," Tick cried, "the enemy falls at my feet." He raised his rod. "With one blow, I'll—" Dune stepped forward and grabbed Tick's arm. "Don't," he said. Tick tried to pull away. Then he relaxed and lowered his weapon. He grinned. "Okay," he said. "I think it's dead anyways." He stuck the toe of his shoe beneath the bird and flipped it away into the grass. "But you get the idea," he said, turning back to the warriors. "Imagine hundreds of us doing that. We'll be unbeatable." His face was alight with glee. And that was when Dune's vague, uneasy feelings came together in one clear understanding. Tick wants war. The thought of war excites him and makes him happy, but not me. The thought of war makes me sick. Dune's way parted from Tick's that night. He walked back to the hotel and up the stairs slowly, his heart heavy. He still didn't know what he was going to do the day after tomorrow. All he knew was that he did not want Tick to be the commander. He would command himself. Alright, so that was chapters 22 and 23. There was that little section about the third town meeting. The next part of the book is called Part 3, The Decision. And we only have a few more minutes, or not a few more minutes, a few more chapters left. So right now Lena is making her way back to Sparks with Maddie, and the people of Ember are having a choice to make because the people of Sparks are ordering them that they leave. So we will find out more what happens tomorrow when I do some more reading. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. There's some nice sunshine outside. Hopefully you guys get some sun, and I will talk to you later. Bye.